everyone, Witch Hazel again, and I am here with part 2 of creating ritual, and that is ritual format. So in part 1 I went over developing your cause, your why for the ritual, for the work you're doing, defining your purpose. This second part hopefully will not take as long to explain because there's really only two aspects that I want to cover about it. As far as ritual format goes, your first question is, do you have a framework you're working with, or do you need to create one? If you are working with a specific tradition, you may already have a framework for ritual that you use. If you are solitary, have always been solitary, you may or may not have a format that you use. Most books will give formats, and luckily ritual format tends to be very similar among different books, different practices, different traditions. So for myself, as said, when I was in a coven, we had a basic outline for a ritual that we used, and then we adapted it for each different working that we did. Currently, I work with 3 books, and I'll go over books at some later point, I'm sure. But these are basically what all of my studies have distilled down to as far as what I find the most useful for me and what I have continued to use. So, first and main book is this one here, A Witch's Bible. Many of you know this one already, by the Ferrars. And they, of course, were of the Gardnerian tradition. So they have a very specific formal format for their rituals. The other books I use have to do with Asatru, and they are I can't pronounce his name now, Kvendolf Gundarsson's 2 books, Teutonic Religion and Teutonic Magic. I really enjoy those. Again, formatting is very similar. Those 2 I do not have in hard copy. They are available to purchase through the Trough. I think they have a hard copy version and a digital version. I have the digital PDF version, and I believe I just found those online available. So, however you like, those are the books that I have and that I work with mainly for structure. Ritual format. Usually you have, and here is my SBAT format. Usually you have casting your circle as the first objective, then calling your quarters, inviting in any deities that you want to work with. If it is a full moon rite, you may want to draw down the moon, if that's something that you do, so that would be included there. You may have some working that builds energy within the circle. Very often it's the witch's rune. So you'd have that, followed by whatever working you're doing. Spell work, divination, crafting. This is that why, that main purpose, that definition of purpose that I went over in the last video. This part of the ritual is where that gets added in. Once you've completed whatever work you're doing, then you would reverse the process. If you have cakes and wine, that would be done more or less immediately after you finish working to help ground you. Then you would go again around the circle, thanking the deities and the elements, watchtowers, whatever you call them, for being present, and sending them with thanks along their way again. And to complete the ritual, you would again open the circle. That is your basic structure. And you can find that in any book. You can look up the ones that I've mentioned, and you can work with that. Now the next thing, probably the more difficult and more important thing, is how to adapt the formats you find to something that is meaningful to you. In my case, my most difficult piece is actually adapting these rituals that I want to use from the Farrars and from Gundarsson from a coven or a folk setting, multiple people, into something that a solitary practitioner like myself can use. There are often things that need to be taken into consideration. It's much easier, I think, to develop things where multiple people have tasks and multiple people are able to interact with each other. When that's not the case, when you're by yourself, you have to think first, can I do this alone, whatever this is? If it's blessing the cakes and wine, if it's anointing yourself or others, if it's, what else? A practical thing I ran into the other day. Can I light the candle and do the pentacle at the same time? I had issues with that. So run through as much as possible your ritual framework and see where you run into issues if you're working as a solitary versus having a coven. So, big question, can I do this alone? If I can't, what can I do? For example, there's a portion in the Farrars Esbat ritual or ritual format where the high priestess does the sign of the pentacle toward the rest of the coven. Since I don't have a coven, I can't really do that, so I had to think, is that something that I want to even include? Is it necessary for me working alone? Or if I like it, there was some wording around that I enjoyed. If I like it, how can I incorporate it just to me? And one of the things I thought of, which I have not yet tried, is having a little mirror, hand mirror, and anointing myself. Okay, so if that appeals to you, you could do something like that. The next question that is highly important in adapting ritual format, rearranging. What do I need to rearrange, if anything, and what do I need to alter, if anything? We talked about this a little bit with can I do it myself. With rearranging, you may come to portions of your ritual that seem out of place when done by yourself. In my case, an example would be drawing down the moon. You have the main drawing down of the energy of the moon into the high priestess. In a coven setting, this would be done by the high priest. And following that, there is a moment where the high priestess faces the coven and basically is adored for a few minutes, and there's a lovely little passage that goes along with that. Well, again, I have no coven, so that piece doesn't really mesh for me. It doesn't seem to make sense to have a moment standing there adoring myself. Well, what I understood from this format was that it is not the high priestess necessarily that the coven is adoring. It is the spirit and essence of the goddess in the form of the moon. Therefore, taking that, I decided it makes more sense for me, working alone, to move that portion up in my ritual format, so that before I begin the actual drawing down, I take a moment to adore the goddess in her form of the moon. So I did that. I moved that portion around. Another thing that you may want to change or move in some cases is the quarters, your correspondences for the quarters. In the Farrar book, and in many books actually, north is considered the quarter that corresponds with earth and the element of earth. In my case, that's not what I practice, and this goes back to when I was in a coven on Fort Carson. We used east as the element of earth, corresponding to or across from west as the element of water, and we used north as the element of air. The reason for this was because it made sense to us that being where we were, situated on the map where we were in Colorado, for us to the east is the rest of the United States. Kansas and everyone else is out east. To the west, past the mountains, we run into the ocean. So it made more sense for us to consider the east as the element of earth. So that is how I have set up my altar and my circles when I cast them. That's different from the ritual from the book. So all I did was just click it over one quarter, and everything else was able to remain the same. So these are little things, and really don't get too caught up in it must be this way because it's written this way. This is the traditional way. Yes, it is. For the Gardnerians, if you're using their format. I technically am not Gardnerian, I just really enjoy a lot of their formatting. Another thing that I've adapted, that I've taken out, is much of is part of the chanting. They have some words they use in chanting and raising power that are not, I don't want to call them nonsensical, but they are not traditional words. The meaning, whatever the meaning was, has been lost. So these words don't mean anything to me. Therefore, I've chucked them. I don't use them, but I do use much of the rest of the wording. On that note, a lot of the wording is very old-fashioned. Lots of these and thous and beest and things like that. I enjoy that, but it doesn't quite fit with how I normally speak. So if I'm adding in elements from myself, you have this very harsh disconnect. You can see where this was written by someone else and this was written by me. So I do go through and read over the traditional passages and see, do I like it? Does that work for me? Does it communicate what I want to communicate? And very often, just a small change here or there will allow me to make it feel more like something that I have put together myself, and it meshes much better with what I've written for the working portion of the ritual. Again, as far as ritual format goes, it is very important, but I like to caution, don't take it too seriously, because in essence, at the end of the day, it is what you need it to be successful for you. Therefore, tweak it, change it, rewrite it, do whatever you need to, even if you just, maybe I have a format, okay, this is my format, I have an outline, and now I'm going to do something totally different. Sometimes you need to see someone else's format in order to create your own. That's perfectly fine. That is all I wanted to say on ritual format. So the next thing coming up, then, we're going to look at how defining your purpose, creating your own little ritual, and the format come together, how we can blend them together. Wonderful. See you in the next video. Thank you.